Joan, how many years did you work for the BBC?
I started full-time in 1976 and I left in 1984. So
Right.
that's about just over 7 years.
Right. And had you trained as an artist?
Yes, I was. As a girl, I was always painting, and so I went to the local art school, which was in Middlesbrough in Yorkshire, and where I did my diploma, and then I went to Loughborough and took my Bachelor of Arts in painting, sculpture, did a bit of everything in those days. And that's when I was taken on a trip to see the BBC in London by one of my art tutors, and about 20 of us piled into a coach, and the next thing I knew, we were outside the BBC.
What was the purpose of the visit initially?
It was an educational visit. We'd also gone by a museum in Oxford, and I think my tutor must have had friends at the BBC or something, but it was to see behind the scenes. And yes,
I see, a sort of tour around.
A tour, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
It was a television centre, was it?
Television centre, yes, where we saw the costume department and the workshops,
Yes.
and finally we went up the steps and into this enormous scenic artist studio, and that's when I couldn't believe that you got paid for painting.
On the outside of the ring road.
Yes, at the huge circular building.
Yes.
With plenty of car parking and everything. Yeah.
Well, there wasn't later on.
No, I know. Frithville Gardens I used to park
That's
when I
right,
worked there.
yes.
Yes.
So you were trained as an artist, but particularly in those days you were taught drawing.
Yes, I did have a very traditional kind of teaching, lots and lots of drawing, and drawing from observation. So it's very traditional, which I liked. I loved doing that. So we did lots of drawing, still life, before
Yes.
we began painting.
Because obviously that was particularly important when you came on to what you did later in court, drawing.
Well, that's
pictures of
right.
people.
Yes, looking at we worked from a skeleton. We had that sort of hanging up in the studio, so we could refer the body to dimensions and positions.
Yeah.
So yes, and just looking and observing, which I liked. Took to it.
So you had this visit to television centre, which made it all look rather glamorous and exciting, presumably. Then did you look out for jobs?
No. I mean, I'd always wanted to work on large scale. So when I was a student and studying the history of art, I looked at some of the artists doing huge scale works, and I thought, I'd love to work on a large scale, and I just thought that would be impossible. So when I went into the BBC studio, I saw all these huge canvases, and it really triggered my imagination. So what everyone was looking around, because we were all art students, some of us were textiles or sculpture, and so I got chatting to a chap, and I remember his name was called Eric, and he was painting, and I said, do you think there's any chance I could get a job here? I said, just joking, and he said. So he said, well, you could. He said, just write in. He said, there's no women work here though, and I said, oh, why is that? And he said, I don't know. So I got back anyway, and he was a nice, friendly chap, and he did tell me who to write to, and it was a chap called Ron King. He had an assistant called Brian Bishop, so I remembered King and Bishop. He's the chess players. So I wrote, and I think. I wrote in, and then I got a reply, which I was very surprised at. And then I was invited for an interview, and I really can't remember. I know that Ron King and maybe Brian Bishop was there, and there were some other people. And I took along my work, which was, lots of these academic drawings,
Yes.
mostly things I could carry, not paintings. So my portfolio.
They were interested presumably in your ability to draw real things. Because
Yes.
presumably you were going to be painting sets or backcloths or something like that.
Yes, I suppose in those days they would see evidence of being able to draw with form and shape and contour, realistically. as some evidence that you could cope with the variety of work that they did there. Yeah.
Well, I'm fascinated by, what went on in the scenic area, because we used to, I used to direct programmes, and we had backcloths and so on in behind the sets.
Yes.
How on earth do you start? I mean, when you arrived, what happened?
We did spent a lot of time watching the other scenic artists and asked how they worked out the scale. So it was really this tiny photograph that a designer might have said, look, we're filming in Bristol and we've got this, we want a kind of Victorian terrace. And he said, we've got about 6 houses and we wanted at this scale. So they'd be drawn out in charcoal. And we had these metre-long rulers, and we'd just literally go 1, 2, 3 along the cloth. They could be 30 feet long. And then we just divide the little photograph up. And somehow it all happened in the brain that a large brush, it could translate all these shapes. And you did simplify things down so much. And I really didn't find it a problem to get my head round at all. It was a learning curve, but surprisingly, I found it easier to paint large things than tiny, tiny miniatures.
Really?
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And did you paint the canvases vertically, or were they horizontal?
They were vertical, and they'd come in on a huge roll. Sometimes we'd have old canvases that had come back from a production, and they were rolled onto the floor. And because the frames were electronic, the frames themselves were lowered, and they were fixed on with nails and stretched. And then you'd often watch your own work that you'd laboured over come back to be painted over. It was to talk about recycling.
Yes. Well, quite. But actually, I'd have thought they were worth keeping. If Victorian terrace, likely to be needed quite often.
Well, some of them did get kept. There was a store of them. We had a special technique if you were going to keep them in storage, and that meant a certain type of paint, and you'd work in dyes so that it wouldn't crack. The paint wouldn't crack, so we used dyes, but we didn't do many of those.
Were you using acrylic paints, or what sort of paints were you using?
Yes, they were acrylic based. They had lots and lots of fire retardant in, so that when it went off, and they did have a kind of sell-by date, they would really, really smell. But they were specially mixed colours for the BBC scenic artist, and there were about maybe 16 colours, and they had colours like shepherd's bush green, shepherd's bush brown, greystone, rowanberry red, and all the earth names that you would, if you wanted red, it would be a cherry red or a stone grey or a TV, I think it was TV grey or TV black. There was a TV white and another kind of white, because we never used pure white because of the television.
Yes, because it would have burnt out or whatever like that.
So there were limited colours, and that's all we had.
Right.
And there were huge 2.5 litre cans.
But you could mix them.
Oh, yes, you could mix them, yeah. We had, so I suppose there were about 14 scenic artists. Some of them were on location, mostly. Some of them went to Pebble Mill and did a little month and come back, so we used to be on a rota there. And we had 4 colour hands, and they were 4 guys who put the cloths up, took them down because it was very heavy work, and they also mixed our paints, and they got us paints. We had a little shopping list, and they cleaned our pallets, these huge pallets, when we'd finished a job. So we were very spoiled.
I mean, you were up ladders, painting all this stuff, scaffolding? What sort
No,
of...
no scaffolding. It was
done?
A purpose-built scenic artist studio, and it had natural light up from it's like a cathedral inside. It was huge. It had natural light very high up there on the roof. It had a false floor, so when we went in on the floor, it was a suspended floor, and they had a basement downstairs, so the frames were attached to... they were electronic, and we had a little console.
So you could raise and lower them.
We could raise and lower them electronically, so we could stand where we were, and if we wanted to do the sky, we could just go over to the console. One console
Yes.
lifted all the frames in the
Mhm.
middle, so we'd all often meet at the console, which was covered in paint, and lower the cloth and paint the sky,
Right.
and then take it up and do the pavement. So, and it was the only studio, as far as I know, that had that. None of the theatres had that, and a lot of the scenic artists, the guys, they had learnt their skill working in music hall and theatre,
Yes.
and to come to the BBC and have this electronic frame,
It was luxury.
they really appreciated
Yes.
it. Yes.
Yes, I
yeah.
suppose theatre work is about the only other place where that sort of
Yes,
thing.
no, that is.
was
I
done.
have worked in theatre. When I left the BBC, I worked for several several theatres, and it was always on the floor, laid out, and it was very difficult to see because the perspective would change unless you could look over it. So sometimes things would get distorted, but it's harder work, obviously.
You didn't have to have a camera looking at your work so that you could check what the colours were like on, because these were approved colours, really.
Yes, they were already, what they call harmonious in a way. Yes, they were, they were all slightly sludgy, I would say. not the brightest of
Right.
colours, but it always looked lovely. The colours merged really well, and you weren't looking at them closely. I mean, quite often there'd be a very thin piece of net over them, so you just glimpse them. So
Yes.
like you'd say, "Oh, that's the moment of truth." I actually saw a glimpse of my cloth. So
Yes, I was going to say, if you watched them at home, you suddenly saw your work.
yes, you'd never recognise it. In fact, if you saw that it was a cloth, you'd think you hadn't done your job, because it had to really look realistic
Yes.
and not stand out too much. But when a cloth came back in after use, the colour hands used to have these massive buckets of paint and huge paintbrushes or rollers, and paint half in blue for sky and half in shepherd's bush green or brown.
Mhm.
And that was traditional. And
It's
then
like priming a canvas.
a priming
yes.
that do dark,
Yes.
light and dark, and then
Yes,
you
yes.
would come and paint your own
Yes.
design onto it. Yes,
Right.
I must say design and organisation of shapes and where the trees would be, and looking back and going back and forward until you get to the detail. And generally, I think we used to have about 3 days on a canvas.
And you work closely, presumably, with the designer who had been allocated to the programme.
Yes, so we'd usually know a week in advance or some time in advance that, there's a show coming up, designer's coming in with some references, so he will have taken some photographs, and then he would know which studio it was going in and what size it was going to be, and then the set, he would say the set is, you're going to see more detail from that window, or the door might open, and so you'd work out where to give more detail.
So you didn't
on
paint
cloth.
unnecessary
So you did,
areas,
yes, it wasn't
no.
unnecessary, and really that's why you did big shapes to start with,
Sure.
to block things in, which was fun. Yes.
Now, did you have to go into studios as well? I mean, presumably they sometimes needed a bit of repair or a bit of
Yes.
extra painting.
Oh, definitely. They'd be hung, and the designer might want a bit more detail, definitely, or extending the cloth, or there may be a bit of stonework on a set. So a built physical set may need a bit of stonework or texturizing.
Yeah.
Usually making things look old, or if they had a garden fence, even they might say, can you just make it look, not so new. So
Right.
we'd go in, and usually they try and keep the same artist, so you knew a little bit about the story behind the set, and you'd got a rapport with a designer, so you'd feel you were involved.
Sure.
It wasn't just a production line.
No. Now, were you also painting flats?
That's right, yes. Yeah, they were just stood up in the middle of the studio, and they were a certain size, 10 foot, something
Now,
like that. Yes.
Were they the same as the sort of flats you would have in a theatre? I mean, with Hessian.
Yes, and propped up from behind by big weights. Yes, so you could move them around a bit. Yes, you didn't have to hang them, and because once you'd hung them and the set was there, there was not much flexibility, but with the flat you could move it, and angle it.
Sometimes you'd have ceiling pieces as well.
Ah, yes, we did do ceiling pieces and floor cloths.
Oh.
Yeah, lots of floor cloths, and they were canvas. So I did one for I Claudius, which not just me. I think the whole studio was working on I Claudius. It was a huge production with Derek Jacobi.
Yeah.
And so the studio floor was covered in it was the same type of canvas, but it really laid down really well, just a single layer of canvas. And what we did lots of old mosaics and sandy looking broken stonework and mosaic. It was really effective.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, you think Roman mosaics, you need,
Yes, we made stencils for them, and we got some beautiful books. We had the BBC Library, which we'd go up and go and research things. So we'd bring pictures down, and the designer, and I'd say, what about this and what colours, and she'd show us his drawings. So we'd kind of work out what colours would suit, and lots of dottling and aging. So that was great. Yeah, it was fascinating doing that. So one of the things I worked on was Tenko, and it was about a women's prisoner of war camp in Japan. And I think they filmed the camp in Dorset or something. But I was asked to paint a huge liner going the whole length. It must have been about 100, maybe 60 feet long, but it was the whole side of the frame as a liner with life-size portholes and the rivets and the kind of water rust coming down. Yes. And so they were going to cut out the doorway and put a real door on and have the actors coming down this ramp from the ship. Yes. Yeah, so and I absolutely loved that. It was just, I think it was the texture and real life size of it. It was only one section.
It had to look real.
Yes, it had to look real, and I've got photographs of it, and I thought that was a great programme. Another one was an Eden line, and that had to look Russian. Mm-hmm. And we managed, as a group of us, we had to paint this flocked wallpaper. So we thought, how are we going to do it? So we found this beautiful piece of lace in the BBC stores, which was from Liberty, actually, this gorgeous lacy patterned thing. So we just stapled it onto a frame and rolled it through, and we just created the most amazing effect. And no one had used that fabric or painted on a cloth. And so we did use it. We were quite resourceful in creating effect, and the designer was very pleased with it anyway. So.
It had to look like flock wallpaper.
Yes, this canvas on the whole, it was, yes, the canvas had to look like wallpaper, and we had to paint pictures on, like three-dimensional paintings of Russian generals. Again, it was very distant, and it didn't get great scrutiny, but it gave the atmosphere.
Did you ever have to do any impressionistic type stuff? I mean, very abstract.
Only if an abstract painting was called for, and they were sometimes. Yes, I think there was something on Leger, the French artist, and we looked at all of his work, and one of the designers wanted a huge kind of cubist paintings, and so we just, we'll do some cubist paintings. Right. And that was a nice change, because you didn't have to be so accurate, really. Yes, no, honestly, there was such a range of things you were asked to do. It was, and I must say, it was just great fun. The artists, we were all had a good sense of humour, and I think the camaraderie and the fun we had was a joy to go in and paint.
When you left, were you the only woman who'd been working there?
No, so my first experience, as the only woman, when I wrote in from that trip when I was a student, they said we'd like to. So they offered me a summer contract, and that was when I was the only woman, and I did that for 6 weeks. And it seemed to go very well. I loved it. They put an article about it in the Ariel magazine. Mm-hmm. And then I went back to college to do my final year. And then, after about a year or 18 months, I got a letter saying that they were offering traineeships as a scenic artist, and would I be interested in applying, and so I applied, as did many others. And
but you'd had that earlier experience.
but I'd had that experience. So what they did on that time, they took on 4 women scenic artists, including myself and 3 others. So they obviously thought, well, women aren't so bad, are they? Because the thing is, the boiler suits and the smocks that the artists wore were made for men. The changing rooms, they had a man's changing room, they had a shower room, so they did actually create facilities for us, and there were more women came, and it was more or less half and half by the time I left.
Yes. And life at Television Centre?
Oh, the BBC bar, we used to go there. We used to go up in our overalls at lunchtime. That's when there were 4 of us women, and some of the guys went on strike because they did not like women in boiler suits going to the bar. So, yes, I can imagine they thought, well, they had to change. They couldn't go in their boiler suits. So we did smarten up and get changed. But the BBC bar, BBC restaurant, and it was just fascinating going up there, just mingling with whatever was being filmed and the actors that you just took it as normal.
Yes.
But we had a BBC bank. We had a nurse at the BBC. If you were feeling a bit ill, you'd go and talk to her. We were very well looked after.
That was a sort of, well, I suppose approaching the sort of zenith of studio productions, wasn't it?
Yes,
I mean,
that was its heyday.
80s.
Yes, but not long after that, we were introduced to this certain blue where you could project images on, and also using photography for doing backcloths. Oh yeah, machine doing printing backcloths.
Oh.
So we were.
So someone would take a photograph and it would be printed?
Yes, I think some museums were experimenting with this. So we were anticipating the end of the usefulness of scenic painting, and also lots of directors wanted to use real life more so than a studio setup. So we felt it was changing. It had its heyday.
Yes. So that was a purely photographic process, was it, on a vast scale?
Well, I think technology had advanced at that time, where you could print huge, our printers, the dot, the
like
dot,
a dot matrix.
Yeah, the dot matrix thing.
Yes.
They'd found a way, technology had just improved, and they were printing huge ones, so you can just input, and they would print them out. So you cut out the middleman.
And that would
basically
be an external company that would print those, presumably.
Yes, I mean they didn't use them at the BBC, but we felt, a lot of us thought it could end up going that way, but I think it was more to do with people wanted to work on location more and have that reality, and not this fake. But with I Claudius, it worked perfectly, because you could recreate something that you maybe can't find today.
No, absolutely. Were you doing other things besides scenic painting at that stage? I mean, I know you went on to do court work.
Whilst I was at the BBC, and during those 7 years, it was pretty exhausting, full on, at the BBC, and we used to often go in weekends to do overtime. So, but the range
of
much
work was there?
There was lots of work, and at one time, I think the BBC owned the little theatre on Shepherd's Bush Green.
Oh, yes.
Which was a Victorian theatre, and sometimes we were asked to go down and to paint flats down there. So there just seemed to be lots of ways that they could use our skills, and but we were asked to do some paintings of copies of old masters. A Moon and Sixpence, the story of not Cézanne. It was never boring, I must say. It wasn't all large scale as well.
But if you had a country house or something like that, and you had paintings on the wall, you would be asked to paint
sometimes
portraits or something.
Yes, so something relevant that gives a bit of extra depth to an actor.
Yeah.
I mean, so one of the things I did enjoy doing was it was a play. I think it was called Play for Today, and it was Elizabeth Alone, and the screenplay was by William Trevor, and so it called for the actress to be filmed doing a watercolour, and so I was assigned that particular production, and I did several watercolours, and I had to be filmed with the work in progress as a double, but it was just my arm and hand and the watercolour. So I was on hand for a week or so,
So they
filming
maybe
in one
come
of the
back
studios.
to it at different times in the story.
Yes, so they'd put a little insert of thing. But I think I wore a similar dress, and then they just, filmed me. And I did get repeat fees for that one. So,
Yes.
But again, you see that the range of the work was always so unexpected. You'd never know what you'd be asked to do next, really.
Now, how about the other work you did? You talked about the courtroom.
Yes, well, when I stayed at the BBC and then went freelance, and then I got married and we moved to Plymouth, and I applied to go on a course. It was a computerised paintbox course, and there were 6 places, and I wrote in, and I got one of the places, and I loved drawing on a tablet. And then somebody within the office said, "Who is that person drawing all the time?" And I said, "Oh, it's me." and he said, "Oh, well, it's okay." He said, so he asked me. He said, "We could do with a court artist." He said. And I did not know what that was. And he said, so I brought in some more drawings anyway, my portraits, which I'd kept from my student days. So he said, well, when we need a court artist, we'll ring you. So I did. So I must have gone to about. So I did that for about 2 or 3 years for the BBC. So I went to Plymouth Magistrate Court, the Central Criminal Court, and Bristol, several courts there, and somewhere else in Truro. I went to Truro, and maybe some other places. It was all in the West Country. Exeter, yes. So
and London as well.
No, not London, because it was a regional. So it was a regional thing.
Yes.
So not London.
So you sat in courtrooms, listened to cases, and drew
So I
pictures.
sat in courtrooms, and first of all I had to find out, it's very intimidating going to court. But in those days I aligned myself with the press, so I could, if you said you were press, you could go in the press seats, and you got better views than the other seats, which tended to be further away. So I had a good look. And that's all I had to do was to look, and I had a little notebook because I had to remember the names, who was the judge, who was defending, and all the names of the barristers in the court.
Would you just draw the people in the dock, or were you also drawing the?
Oh, you cannot draw any witnesses. You can't draw anyone in the jury, and. So I was only asked to draw a likeness of this particular person. I was given a name.
What about the judge or the?
Oh yes, I could draw the judge. I mean, when it fell back on that, some of the judges were the same judges that I'd see quite often, and I'd think, oh, it's him again. But you only saw the back of the heads of the barristers. Right. And so I did a lot of drawings of wigs, the horsehair wigs, but it was the defendants really who was my main concern, and because so often they'd been in remand or something for months, so there were no pictures of them, so you couldn't Google them or anything, so they literally were what you drew. They had to be from memory, because I think since the days of Victorian times, drawing in courts had been forbidden, and since 1920, I think. And so I just took a little book in, and I still have the little books, and I drew tiny sketches of a nose or an eye, and drew things like high forehead,
But you couldn't be seen to be drawing.
No, and I was very careful that, if I was... you can't do that now. I went to the Old Bailey recently, last year, and it's much stricter. You can't take your phone in or anything you can write on now. But in those days, I could at least take a little notebook, and the press did as well. So I just pretended I was making, writing, and then I turned it into a sketch somehow. I could go home. I didn't live nearby, not too far away, so I'd get home and work up my sketches a little bit more with a bit more technique. But generally speaking, as soon as I left that courtroom, I'd have to find somewhere so I could get this image
Yes,
the
before
image
you
stayed
forgot.
fresh. Before,
Yes.
before I forgot.
Yes.
But if I did it quickly enough, I could go back into court, have a little glimpse of the picture, and then make a few alterations. And if the court doors had glass windows in, even better.
Yes.
But they didn't always. So
Peek through.
yes.
When you drew the courtroom stuff, was it? Did you use pastels or what did you do? It wasn't proper painting, was it? It was
No,
usually a
so it
drawing
was more like a
with-
drawing,
yes.
drawing material. So I bought from various art shops flesh-coloured pastel pencils, which I could sharpen. And I had a selection of pencils, some pastels, only a selection because I didn't want to be laden with material, so I just chucked them all in a bag. And a little case to keep the drawings flat. So I tried to make them life-size, the drawings.
Oh, right.
They were life-size, so you could get some feeling, some gesture into it. And also the larger drawings, or the life-size ones, looked better when they were reduced in size for television.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I imagine so.
Yeah.
And you presumably were never drawing on white paper.
No, I had nice paper, full pastel paper, like a kind of flesh coloured or brown or kind of tawny coloured, especially for drawing. Nice, they'd call it ong paper.
Yes,
Yeah.
right.
Yes.
Did any of your people who you were drawing ever ask for copies?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. There was two young lads who were caused a bit of mayhem in a nightclub. I was asked to draw them, and they actually came out and said, I don't think I'm much better looking than that, and everything. So I don't know how they managed to. They weren't found guilty. So.
Right.
But I didn't give them the pictures.
If they weren't guilty, did the material get televised?
No.
No. So only if they were made.
Yes, only
guilty.
if it was, because they were, free then. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. But many of these cases would go on for days. So
Yes.
you would go away and draw things. And
Yes,
then
that's
they wouldn't
right.
be used if they
No,
were.
but they wanted
quitting.
them the same day, just in case, because sometimes they wanted names to say,
Yeah.
the trial is opening today of this person. Even they wouldn't wait until they were found guilty or not. Yeah.
And how were these things used in the news studios? Were they photographed?
Yes,
Or
one of these.
put on caption cards.
I'd just take it in, and there was one of these flatbed. There's a name for them, flatbed bed things, and a camera would
Oh, a
come
rostrum
down.
camera.
Yes, and then it would be taken, and
Yes.
I would take the drawing home.
Yes.
So they'd have the image, and it was put on TV
So you went home and watched.
and watched. Yes,
Yes.
it was
Got it.
only a flash, and people used to say, "Oh, there's such, sort of not very good drawings," and I used to say, "Yes, well, you have to draw from memory. It's not like you can." It's not like doing a life drawing and have plenty of time. It's a matter of minutes,
Quite.
And also, you got so wrapped up in the court case that it was very difficult to concentrate, because it was sometimes harrowing
Yes.
information, or just downright fascinating. And you had to leave the court and concentrate on the drawing. And quite often I'd just go back to the court, because I just felt very privileged, and also very interested in the law and
Yes,
how it
yes.
went. So I loved doing that. Yes.
When you were doing that, were you freelance?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, I was
But
freelance
still working
then.
for the BBC, so you were
Yes.
paid.
Yes,
paid
I was
for
a
each drawing or
freelance
something.
court artist. Yes, and I
Yes.
did it for a while, and then didn't do it. I mean, it paid reasonably well. Yeah. So that job ended, and now it's all the BBC's still going down in Plymouth. I believe. Yes.
Yeah. And you still see these drawings from the courtroom.
Yes.
Fascinating.
Yes, it is. Yes.
What happens to these drawings afterwards?
I've got most of them.
Just keep them?
They're all at home.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, in a drawer.
Right.
Yes.
But it's not like cartoons where you never had to draw politicians, presumably, unless they were in court.
No. I mean, then that would be quite difficult, because everyone knows what a famous person looks like,
Yes.
so that would be quite tricky to.
Well, I was going to say, if you don't get the person in the dock absolutely right, it doesn't desperately matter because...
No, exactly, because you're not comparing it
No.
to anything.
No,
but
exactly.
quite often, yes, I mean, some people do become infamous, and they do get photographed, but
Yes.
not often.
Yes, quite. So you enjoyed your time at the BBC?
Absolutely,
you have
yes,
good memories
yes,
of it?
and lots of good friends I met there, which,
Oh, good.
yes.
Well, thank you very much, Jan. I think that's an extremely interesting story, actually, Jan.
Thank you. I enjoyed
Good.
it.
That's
Thank you.
good.